People who work in luxury industries, what is a complete ripoff that rich people happily pay for? One of the biggest ripoffs in the luxury world is anything labeled as exclusive convenience, packaged as sophistication. Wealthy people aren't just paying for the product, they're paying to feel separated from everyone else. That's where the absurd margins hide. A few examples that insiders quietly laugh about. Hotel laundry services. This is probably the king of ripoffs. You can charge $50 to wash one t-shirt because wealthy travelers don't want to figure out where the local laundromat is. The hotel calls it express cleaning, but it's literally the same washer and dryer the staff uses for bulk linens. Fine dining supplements, truffle shavings, and Wagyu upgrades are a gold mine. The cost to the restaurant is tiny compared to the add-on price. Half the time, the truffle doesn't even taste that strong. It's there because the guest wants to signal that they can afford it. Caviar service. People pay insane amounts for a tin that costs the restaurant only a fraction of what they charge. The theatrics. Silver spoons, presentation, a staff member standing by like it's a sacred ritual. Do all the heavy lifting. Private transfers from luxury hotels. A hotel will charge hundreds of dollars for a car ride that a regular taxi or Uber could do for $20. The only difference is someone opens the door for you and offers sparkling water. High-end fashion, basic items. A plain white t-shirt stamped with a luxury logo is the most blatant example. The material isn't special, and the craftsmanship is often mediocre, but the markup is astronomical because the logo itself is the product. Spa products. Hotel spas sell creams and oils at margins that would make a drug dealer jealous. The same formula, minus the branding, is often available online for a tenth of the price. What all of these have in common is this. Wealthy clients aren't paying for practicality or value. They're paying to not think, to feel important, and to show they can afford not to care about the price. Luxury businesses know this very, very well. Story 2. Luxury beauty brands. You're paying a king's ransom for perfume, makeup, hair care, and skin care that often shares R&D space with drugstore brands, at least for the global conglomerates. Of course, there are differences. You might be paying for higher quality ingredients, for example, materials sourced from a specific region, heavier packaging, glass versus plastic, or a fancier store experience, real Italian marble floors at a shop-in-shop versus the shelves at CVS. But the quality difference is usually negligible to the end user. You're also generally paying to access innovative technologies before they reach mastige or drugstore brands. However, within a few product launch cycles, the technology and formulas usually trickle down and become more widely accessible. Pro tip: if you're lucky enough to travel internationally, always try to buy big-ticket products in travel retail spaces. Base prices are almost always intentionally cheaper than local stores, and you save on duty, taxes, on top of that. Story 3. This might be a weird one, but PRP treatments. I work in medical devices, mostly in the OR, but we also work with beauty and med spas. PRP is a cash pay only treatment, except in very specific diabetic scenarios where reimbursement applies. I've seen some crazy price gouging by doctors in high cost of living areas, anything from $2,000 to $10,000. The most expensive kit or system my company produces is $1,200, but that's only used in the operating room because we harvest your bone marrow aspirate. The kits for clinics using a simple blood draw cost $600 to $700 for the most expensive, with the cheapest around $125. I even know doctors who can do the cheapest technique with just a vial and centrifuge and charge only $100 for the entire draw, spin, and injection procedure. Story 4. I worked for a luxury hotel brand for a while in the club-level suites at a non-resort property. If you want a club-level room, it's really just a high floor, a nice continental breakfast, afternoon tea, and maybe cocktails in the evening, but nothing fancy. A regular room costs about double the price of a standard room, so the extra pampering might be worth it. A suite, however, usually costs about 5 times as much. It makes no financial sense. You could have a suite, a pastry selection brought to your room for breakfast, afternoon tea delivered, and an in-room waiter for cocktail service for roughly half the price of the club floor. The one thing everyone claims makes the club floor always worth it is the club concierge. They're usually just a regular concierge who prioritizes the club floor, putting anyone not on that floor on hold. That is, unless you walk up and hand them $100 to keep your line open, then tip generously when they come through with an impossible reservation or tickets. There's a certain type of old money who knows the club floor is basically a scam, meant for people who want to show off or for upgrades. They understand they can get better service for much less off the floor and then tip like crazy. A resort hotel is usually a different story, but not always. Story 5, definitely cars. I get the craftsmanship in a Rolls Royce, but a $400,000 SUV is absolutely bonkers. Adjacent story. I worked for several major luxury automotive manufacturers as an operations consultant, so I had plenty of exposure to what rich franchise owners and dealer principals do. Track events, racing events, all expenses paid trips, and more. I had to build relationships with these people, which meant I got sent to a lot of huge dealer events that manufacturers would splurge on for their franchise owners. Side note, Lexus really spoiled their dealers. Trips to the Bahamas, golf at Pebble Beach, conferences at the Ritz-Carlton, you name it. I can count on one hand the number of owners who weren't completely batshit crazy or total weirdos. Most of them were anything but normal. Many seemed trapped in a perpetual midlife crisis, getting into massive age gap marriages with young women from other countries or throwing fits over stupid things like a poor round of golf or a hunting trip that didn't end with them bagging an elephant. Before I got into consulting work, I sold Mercedes-Benz, and I've come to one conclusion. Rich people are some of the weirdest creatures on the planet. They are not normal at all. Story 6, brand names. I'm really into collecting colognes and fragrances. There are bottles that go for $500 that you can get for $25. You're mostly paying for marketing, and the price gives a feeling of exclusivity. I own a few of the pricier ones. I won't name brands, but I once paid $600 for a bottle only to find an exact copy for $45. The ingredients have to be listed on the CDC website. It's exactly the same thing. The really expensive stuff is called niche perfumery. It's different from designer fragrances like YSL, Dior, Prada, Versace, or Armani. Designers make more than just fragrances. Niche houses only make fragrances, nothing else. Quality has nothing to do with it. Niche simply means they only make fragrances. It doesn't mean they're any better than other stuff on the market for a tenth of the price. Story 7. Former luxury hotel room service coordinator here. I mostly answered phones and did office work. All the food is marked up, but booze in particular is insane. Pro baseball players love cheap beer and will happily pay 3 times the price after we grab it from the grocery store down the block to restock after they drink it all. Don't even get me started on liquor. Absolutely eye-watering price per shot, even for the cheap stuff. We could tell who knew what they were doing versus who was ordering what they thought was fancy, but they all overpaid. The worst part, honestly, was what people didn't pay for. There's something so odious about giving super rich people free stuff. I was barely able to afford to eat, working 40+ hours per week, comping drinks and sending out elaborate free amenities to people spending more on their stay than I make in a month. Story 8. I worked in a couple of high-end luxury hotels you've definitely heard of in a major American city, and honestly, you really do get what you pay for. White glove service, excellent anticipation of needs, top quality ingredients. We had detailed dossiers on guests that allowed us to give each one a truly special, personalized experience. Remember the starred restaurant? Yes, I drank the Kool-Aid scene from The Bear? Exactly that. Real luxury isn't about being shiny, expensive, or premium. It's about anticipating guests' needs and having everything ready before they even know they need it. It's about going the extra mile and making thoughtful accommodations. Honestly, those were my favorite workplaces. Country clubs were similar. High-level, detailed service that made everything feel seamless. ETA. Y'all got me going down memory lane. I chefed at the Waldorf Astoria just before it closed for renovation. In the banquet kitchen, they had a banner over the entryway that read, "The difficult right now, the impossible in a little while." Let me tell you, the lifetime servers and butlers there embodied dignity and class. These were men who spent 50 years serving in positions of respect at the city's finest hotels, back when that really meant something. We'll never have it again. I remember one of my cooks getting annoyed about a substitution a guest requested, and he said, Why don't they just tell them no? I responded, no, no. This is the Waldorf goddamn Astoria. We make dreams come true. You want to say no, you take that shit down the street to the DoubleTree. Sounds silly, I know, but a big portion of our restaurant guests were literally Ma and Pa Kettle on a bus tour from Iowa who had spent their entire lives saving up for a trip to the big city. A prick-fix 3-course meal at Peacock Alley was included as part of the package. I felt a real responsibility to do right by them. Second edit, I'm crying, loving hearing everyone's experiences, and it's amazing that this level of service is still appreciated. I had to leave the industry a few years ago because PTSD, everything you've heard about kitchens is real, and The Bear is basically a documentary. The one thing I miss is luxury service because it gave me the chance to have a personal impact and create a special experience someone will remember for the rest of their life. Also, all the oysters, foie gras, and caviar I could eat. I hope everyone gets to experience this level of service at least once in their lives. It's truly magical. Story 9. If you make your product rare, it becomes highly desirable. We are very small olive oil producers and have all the equipment to handle production ourselves. We work very cleanly and organically, in a way that goes beyond any certifications, so we don't deceive anyone on that front. However, some oils are truly special, like the very early harvest or oil from wild olive trees. We have a few wealthy customers, and if we tell them we only have 10 liters of wild olive oil left, they want to buy it all, just to know they have it while no one else does. Sometimes we find ourselves exaggerating the remaining amount to make certain rich buyers purchase everything available. Story 10. Caskets and urns. I work in a fancier funeral home as support staff, not a director. We literally sell $80 urns imported from India for over $600. A $2,000 casket goes for $8,000. Remember, federal law allows you to bring your own urn or casket. Sometimes it feels like there is more financial flexing at funerals than at weddings. Story 11. I once DJ'd at a casino in Macau. The VIP tables would competitively send bottles of champagne to each other's tables just to flaunt their wealth. Announcements would go over the PA system, but the bottles never actually existed. It would be like, Table 10 sends 5 bottles of champagne to Table 4. Then, Table 4 sends 15 bottles to Table 10. Then, Table 10 sends 30 bottles to Table 4, and so on, eventually reaching around 200 bottles. They weren't friends. They were just showing off. A few symbolic bottles with indoor fireworks would be brought to the table by girls, but that was it. I asked the owner what it was about, and he said they could pick the bottles up another day if they wanted. But nobody ever does. It's purely for show. Absolutely insane. Story 12. One of the more interesting practices is having expensive replicas made of priceless jewelry in case of theft. My surrogate dad in Nassau County, Long Island, knows people who spent thousands and thousands of dollars on costume dupes of their finest jewelry so they can wear those out while keeping the real pieces at home under lock and key. Imagine a set of costume jewelry worth more than your vehicle, that sort of thing. Story 13. Perfect service is service you don't see but feel. I've been a high-end chauffeur for almost 30 years, driving for the 1% of the 1%. The goal is seamless and invisible service, anticipation, discretion, and knowing the answers to all the local questions. Guests assume you've been to the restaurant or venue before and know what you're doing. And you do. I've even had to read the wiki on sports teams I know nothing about, just to anticipate the questions the owners might ask. Preparation is everything. It pays well and is an immensely satisfying job. Story 14. My billionaire real estate client had me going back and forth with the selling realtor over a $10,000 difference in what he wanted to pay for a multi-million-dollar vacant lot. He made a point of telling me that he and his wife were sipping a $10,000 bottle of port while I was haggling over $10,000 on the property. Easily the most unhappy client I've ever had. Rich and unhappy is no way to live. Story 15. Less common, but the most vile scam I've seen. I worked for a restaurant that wanted to appear high-end, located in a district full of white men in finance and gilets. Very popular for business breakfasts. They had a huge oven near the expo showing freshly baked sourdough. But it wasn't actually baking. It was set to about 40 degrees Celsius to keep the bread warm, and it was delivered in the morning, never baked on site. If Someone ordered bread and olives or a charcuterie board. We would put on a whole show, slicing, arranging, and serving that bread. You'd expect that any other dish with bread would get the same, right? Nope. Orders like toast, full English, avocado toast, etc. all got generic Warburtons. FOH staff dealt with complaints constantly. I lasted 3 weeks. The restaurant lasted about a year after I left. Story 16. I've been a private nurse for very wealthy people. It sounds like a necessity, medical support, but most of my clients aren't actually sick. They're just rich and can afford it. They like the attention. I've seen so much. Private jets, chauffeurs who sit outside in cars for days on end going nowhere. Just last week, I watched a 90-year-old woman slather La Mer on her arms. It broke me. The amount of waste is staggering. Story 17. Room service. You'd be surprised how many people are willing to pay extra fees for poor quality food and smaller portions just so they don't have to walk down and pick it up. It definitely depends on the hotel. Your experience at a 3-star Michelin restaurant hotel will differ from that at a casino or smaller hotel. The casino I work at is a 4-diamond resort, and even at its peak, I found the room service lacking. Bland, small portions, and poor quality. Complaints were constant. The hotel still offers room service, but it's not 24 hours, and they won't tell you if they're short on servers, so it's not uncommon for guests to have to order to go and pick it up themselves. Ironically, this has never cost the resort a diamond, even though room service is part of the rating. We even have a 24-hour cafe, and we've gotten used to redirecting guests there, apologizing for no room service due to a lack of runners. Story 18. I'm not rich, but I'm comfortable for the most part. As you get older and usually earn more in your career, your view of luxury often shifts from things to comfort or convenience. You also start to realize how true the phrase "time is money" really is. Yeah, I could spend a couple of hours doing XYZ, but paying someone to do it gives me 2 hours of leisure. There's also overlap between things and comfort. For example, when I had a job that required me to stand on my feet all day, a pair of $200 shoes was worth it. My ankles and knees weren't killing me, and they lasted longer. When you bust your ass for most of the year, being taken care of for a few days is worth a lot. Spending on something that makes your daily existence less painful is worth it too. Story 19. Private jet pilot here. Let's talk catering services. There are companies that, for lack of a better word, cater specifically to the corporate jet world. They provide food for the aircraft, delivered to the fixed base operators before departure. We're talking stuff like Asian salads for around $150, or a club sandwich for about $80. These are rough estimates based on what our dispatch has told me. I've never personally ordered them. Many of our Part 91 owner flights clients watch their expenses closely so they don't order these extravagant options. It's a ridiculous waste of money to pay that much for Panera quality food when they could just have us pilots pick it up on the way to the aircraft. The people who don't realize this, or don't care, are usually charter clients, and they often end up running over $1,000 for just a handful of salads and sandwiches, getting completely shafted by these companies, or their brokers. Story 20. Clothing industry here. People will blindly pay a premium for items made in certain countries because they believe anything made there is automatically better than anywhere else. The truth is, the country of manufacture matters very little compared to the specific factory or workshop it's made in. Countries like Portugal, Turkey, Bosnia, Romania, and Moldova are generally considered to have high-quality control standards, fair wages, and talented craftsmen. In reality, Portugal and Turkey are significantly cheaper to manufacture a t-shirt or hoodie than Italy, Spain, France, or the UK. They produce large volumes and also have lower corporate taxes. As for Bosnia, Romania, and Moldova, and in many cases Turkey, this is where much of Europe's sweatshop labor operates. Wages are significantly lower than in other European countries, and there are fewer legal requirements for worker benefits, allowing factories to pay someone half or less than they'd earn in Italy or the UK. Because of this, you also see fewer skilled workers, and the setup is more like an assembly line you'd find in Asia or Latin America. That said, producing in the good countries isn't as expensive as people think. Brands like Zara, Topman, and many other mall brands have lines made in Turkey, Portugal, or Peru, all countries known for really good cotton. The cost to make a t-shirt there generally ranges from $3.50 to $20, depending on volume, material, and printing process. It's nothing crazy. The rest is markup. Whether you want to pay the premium for the look or the brand is up to you. For example, Pangaea and Givenchy t-shirts and hoodies are produced in the same Portuguese workshop. Pangaea averages around $50 a t-shirt, while Givenchy goes for $700. While Givenchy does use slightly nicer fabric and more luxurious finishing overall, the actual production cost is minimal. A Pangaea tee might cost about $8 to make, and a Givenchy one around $14. The huge markup on Givenchy is purely because it's marketed as luxury and exclusive. Tied into this, some countries that get a bad reputation, China, India, and Mexico mainly, aren't always bad. China, for example, excels at technical clothing like windbreakers and sportswear, as well as plastic and acetate eyewear. Mexico produces really good leather shoes and boots. India is great at intricate woven fabrics. Many companies manufacture in these countries because they have the infrastructure to produce at scale, significantly cheaper and faster than in a more reputable place like the USA, often with equal or better quality. The takeaway: judge every product and brand on a case-by-case basis, and don't generalize just because of the country it's made in. Story 21. I work in the club world, and honestly, it's not that the rip-offs are really rip-offs. The reality is you have to spend a lot of money to offer the level of service these clients expect. Take wine markups, for example. The top comment right now is about that. But the markup is how we pay staff and buy quality products while focusing on quality over quantity. The pool of clients a luxury venue serves is smaller, so you need higher markups. Think of it this way. Imagine a business that serves 5,000 people. They sell coffee and need to make $5,000 to keep the lights on. Each coffee costs $1. Now, a luxury coffee place needs to make that same $5,000, but because it's luxury, it only serves 500 people. Each coffee now needs to cost $10 just to keep the lights on. Story 22. I worked at a number of private Forbes 5-star resorts and Michelin-starred restaurants. Honestly, the most expensive property was in a remote location in Colorado. They were happy, just to break even. There was typically more staff than guests. Food was flown in daily, we didn't have a kitchen budget, and every dinner featured a new menu. We never repeated dishes for the same guests. They really did get value out of the $20,000 plus amount they would spend. The rarest thing for these guests was to have friends who genuinely liked them for who they were. Staff were hired for their friendliness and encouraged to build relationships with the clientele. Almost every guest would leave crying because they felt like a normal person again. Wealth can get you a lot of things, but real friends are the true luxury. Story 23. I do high-end cocktail bartending. One of the rules I live by is that the difference between an $11 drink and a $30 drink is purely presentation. The glass needs to be immaculately polished, the ice in perfect condition, and the garnish skillfully prepared. You also need the right environment to sell $30 drinks, clean surfaces, and enough staff to keep the bar top consistently pre-bussed. All of that has nothing to do with how good the drink actually tastes. That's the real problem with most bartenders, in my experience. Making delicious drinks is important, but presentability is what sets the price tag and perceived value. Story 24. I work in fine dining as a cook. Sure, the $80 steaks are a thing, and so is a $20 set crème brûlée. But probably the biggest ripoff that sells like crazy is the charcuterie board, up to $180. Yes, it looks impressive and has some expensive meat and cheese, but it's mostly filled out with nuts, pickled vegetables, crostini, and a few dips. Overall, there's maybe $15 to $20 worth of product on the board, and it takes me 5 to 7 minutes to assemble each one, after the meats are sliced during afternoon prep. The margins on that are better than almost anything else on the menu except perhaps high-end wine. People love their chart, pronounced chart, and are happy to pay out the nose for it. 4 charts coming right up. Story 25. Clothing. The average wealthy person is not buying bespoke clothes. They're paying $300 for a hoodie that costs $7 to produce, often in the same factory that makes clothing for mass market retailers. I know someone in my family who owns a small factory that's had a Canada Goose contract for well over a decade. Even an extremely complex jacket like those from Canada Goose, which are some of the most complicated garments produced on a large scale, costs around $95 each to make, even accounting for Canadian wages. Story 26. Obligatory. Not me, but a guy I know. One of my best friends worked at a very high-end hotel in the Rocky Mountains for a few years. There are no rooms at this hotel that go for less than $1,000 a night. The guests are diverse: individuals, families, business travelers, you name it. He said that no matter who the person is, the odds are very high that they check into their expensive hotel room for the weekend, sit and watch TV for 48 hours, and then go home. This happens year-round. The final cherry on top, most guests don't seem any happier when they leave. It's basically just a break from working really hard or doing whatever they normally do. Most don't even take advantage of the luxury amenities. Just 48 hours of recorded football in a $2,500 a night suite, then a private shuttle to the airport. Story 27. My brother works in fine dining as a manager. Someone once requested a sparkler on top of a dessert, and the restaurant initially didn't want to do it. My brother said, "Sure, we can do that for $500. And the guest paid. Now, they keep a box of sparklers in the kitchen for requests, and the restaurant charges $500 each time. Once one dessert is paraded through the dining room, past all the other couples celebrating bachelorette parties or people who won big, it's at a casino, everyone wants a sparkler. It blows my mind. Story 28. Catering that they don't even eat. My wife works at an FBO at PBI, where the ultra-rich land their private jets. They order all this amazing food that goes completely untouched. Everything in individual containers. Talking thick cuts of prime rib, vegetables, mashed potatoes, all in one container. Lucky for me, the food that isn't opened gets split between my wife and her co-workers. You wouldn't believe some of the stuff these rich people leave behind. Several months ago, my wife came home with one of those big Yeti cooler bags. It retails for over $400, and it had just been left behind. Story 29. I once splurged $43 on a pot of coffee delivered to my room in Vegas, and honestly, it was worth every penny. After a rough night, I was battling a terrible hangover. I've stood in those ridiculously long lines at Starbucks and other coffee spots like everyone else, craving my morning brew. Instead of sweating it out for 15 minutes, feeling nauseous and irritated by questions about coffee, I could just lie in bed, suffering in comfort. It all comes down to how you perceive value. And that day, I felt like I scored a bargain. I would have gladly paid $80 for that pot of coffee to be delivered. Story 30. I worked in luxury fashion. Not sure if this is relevant, but I've seen hundreds of thousands of dollars in actual cash spent on purses. I worked at Celine and was even offered a job in France at one point. We had an alligator purse that, at the time, was priced at $35,000. We had 2 in stock and sold 1 to a member of a Saudi royal family. They came in and essentially shut the store down. We were all called to the floor. The Saudi family had a black truck deliver 2 gym bags full of American cash, hundreds of thousands of dollars. My store manager and her assistant were busy running bills through the counter while the family shopped. They left spending nearly $250,000 on purses and jackets from Celine. Story 31. Cook here. I've worked in fine dining exclusively for over a decade, mostly country clubs, and currently at a high-end hotel chain with locations in multiple countries. Everything on the menu is marked up. Everything. The markups are so insane that the kitchen staff alone account for half the luxury vehicles in the front lot. You paid around $176 over wholesale for that caviar so the dishwasher can drive a G-Wagon. We can charge $6 for a fried egg simply because we say so. You could buy a dozen eggs for the price of 1 fried egg at a luxury hotel. It's not a special egg. It's the same brand as the diner down the street. I've seen the eggs we use. You could probably get 3 eggs there for the same price as the single egg I make for you. I'll make you a $47 burger that uses the same beef and the same buns as a sit-down burger place. Our food isn't priced to be reasonable. It's priced that way purely because we can. Some of the people I serve are so wealthy, they don't even ask for a bill. They just charge it to their room with no concern for how much they've spent. A couple of days ago, a lady ordered a gorgeous tomahawk ribeye for her dogs to share. They didn't like it. She threw it away and just shook her head at them. I know because I asked, like I actually cared about her dog's preference. We have a once-a-year regular. Pretty sure this guy is so wealthy he doesn't exist in our mortal realm. His world is his own. He comes in looking like a regular dude with disposable income. New Balance sneakers, Kirkland khakis, a polo, single suitcase, no fanfare. He orders all of his food freestyle. Nothing is ever off the menu for him. 4 egg whites, $6 each. Fine herbs, about $5. Brie, depends on what we have. Let's say $10 a serving. Braised beef cheek, a dinner item we always have, he pays full price of $62.99. And a side of fruit, $10. This is his breakfast. Both mornings he's here every single summer, like clockwork. He drinks 2 double kettle one Caesars, sometimes a latte, and leaves a generous tip. His breakfast usually comes out to a couple $100, more if he has company. At absolute best, it's really worth maybe $50. Our food is very good, but we're catering to people who don't just have disposable income. They have incomparable amounts of income, and we take full advantage of that. We feel no guilt because they never, ever complain. Story 32. I worked in high-class security. Can't go into details for safety reasons. They pay a lot of money for good service. The elites love good service, especially if they feel appreciated. They also like to tip people they find resourceful. One time, I had a security shift for a high-security assignment and met a young princess. She was 16. Super kind, very curious, and generally very smart. She asked me for help with something minor, and I helped her. Afterwards, we got into a deeper conversation. She told me her mother, a queen, wanted her to study something very high profile, but she didn't want to. It was too much work. She just wanted to marry another royal so she could be a trophy wife and focus on her own business while not having to work. She was super pissed at her mom because she thought her mom forced her to study something difficult just to annoy her. I told her mom was right, but she was also right. She should do whatever she wants. She's a princess after all. I told her she had 2 options. Either be the starring role in somebody else's life and never have to work again, or be a boss princess who doesn't need another man's money to get what she wants. She thought it was very interesting that someone would talk to a princess like that. I was just on eye level with her, being honest. Just some empathy for the emotional rage of a teen princess. The next day, her mom, the queen, came up to me, greeted me, and said, "Thank you," while giving me a generous tip. I just stood there and asked, "What for?" She just smiled, nodded, and walked away. The next night, the princess came to me and said she understood her mom better just because of that 20-minute chat. Apparently, I had accidentally helped them both get along better. Service among many elites is highly compensated, even if it's just a little advice. That tip alone was 30% of my monthly salary. Story 33, dignity. As a valet at a billionaire hangout, we had all sorts of regulars who would pay us ridiculous amounts, often just to embarrass us. A notable one was a guy who came in about once a week with a $100 bill and asked me to tie his shoes. He'd step out of his Rolls-Royce Cullinan with one shoe untied and money in hand. As best we could tell, it was meant to demean us by making us do menial tasks. But really, it was a pittance to him, equivalent to about 8 hours of labor for me. So, of course, we always did it. Story 34. I completely disagree with everyone saying clothing is the biggest ripoff. At least on the extreme end, of course. But saying the $20 hoodie you got from Costco is the same quality as a $200 American Giant hoodie isn't true. And yes, I buy the $20 hoodies from Costco too. They're good quality for the price. That doesn't mean the $200 hoodie isn't worth it. Same with jeans. A $150 pair of jeans is going to hold up way longer than the $25 jeans you got from Kohl's. Story 35. I have worked in high-end retail for a decade at several well-known luxury companies. Most of the time, I'm honest with clients, but sometimes we make truly ugly items that rich people fawn over. If they're in love with it, even though I think it's ugly, I'll talk it up. Afterwards, we'll joke among ourselves that rich people will buy anything. Also, employees at these luxury brands almost never pay full price. We trade discounts with each other. A personal opinion. Louis Vuitton is overhyped and not worth the money. You can get something more unique at another brand. They also pay their employees the lowest of any high-end brand. I struggle to even call them a luxury brand, given how completely oversaturated their market is. And the fact that their most popular canvas bags, looking at you, never full tote, are actually just plastic. Story 36. I used to work as a butler at a 5-star hotel, one of the most prestigious in my country. I saw celebrities and politicians such as Bruno Mars, Taylor Swift, the Prime Minister of England, and many more on a monthly basis. I'm not kidding. These guests pay extra for water. Apparently, there's cheap water and expensive water. There's no difference in taste, texture, or feeling. It's literally just water. Among the staff, it was a running joke to try out the water and figure out what made it so expensive. And yet, they pay extra nonetheless. The only difference is literally in presentation. The expensive water comes in a pretty, fancy-looking glass bottle, and that's it. Guests will pay about 30 times more for a fancy bottle. And there are layers to it. Cheap, expensive water for the standard rooms and floors. Mid-tier water for the deluxe rooms and floors. Very expensive water for the premium or presidential suites. There's no difference in taste for any of these waters. I really mean it. It's the same water we drink. Oh man, there were so many absurd things like this. I'll try to remember more. Those were fun and very luxurious times. Story 37. A funny story from when I was a lowly apprentice. A big company had a domed ceiling with decorative cracked plaster. They wanted a circular light around the edge to illuminate the center. The architect chose a $20,000 custom-made cold-rolled dimmable neon light to go around the 18-foot diameter dome. The problem was, the tube arrived broken in transport. They sent another, but the second one was accidentally broken by the journeyman. By then, the client just wanted something to light up their dome. So my boss went to Home Depot, bought a dozen small floodlights and outdoor sockets, and I set them up pointing toward the center, all on a dimmer switch. Total cost, about $100 in materials. We thought it looked great, all these points of light highlighting the cracked plaster. A month later, the third replacement arrived, and we finally installed the $20,000 light. It worked perfectly, casting a nice pink glow evenly around the dome. But even though the expensive light looked good, we were asked if we could put the $100 lights back in. Story 38. I worked front desk at a luxury hotel that offered membership services. Their member waiting list was a mile long, and people were typically on it for years before getting a membership. With that kind of demand, you'd expect a lot of perks on property, and most wealthy guests were elitist as hell about the benefits they felt they deserved. One guy came in claiming that, as a member, he always got 2 bottles of Dom Perignon in his room from concierge whenever he stayed. If you know Dom Perignon, it's around $250 a bottle. Alternatively, a bottle of Prosecco goes for about $25. When I asked my concierge if they were actually giving him Dom Perignon, they said, "Oh yeah, we usually just give him 2 bottles of Prosecco with a Dom label slapped on them." Bro could not tell the difference. So yeah, membership services have perks, but they're not always what they're cracked up to be. Story 39. Here's the thing. People generally don't buy luxury goods because they're necessarily better. They buy them for the brand story and how it makes them feel. My favorite example is watches. A $20 Casio keeps better time and is more durable than a $100,000 Patek Philippe. It does exactly what a watch is supposed to do. Better than the Patek. The person buying the $20 Casio just wants a nice-looking watch that tells the time and maybe enjoys the satisfaction of getting a good watch at a great price. The person buying the $100,000 Patek is buying exclusivity, horological history, perceived status, a token of financial success, and a declaration of refined taste. They don't care that a $20 watch keeps better time. The Patek is that expensive because those feelings justify the price. And before anyone asks, I own a dozen Casios and not a single Patek. Story 40. Pretty much all of it. Rich people don't care about the prices so much as they care about weeding out the pores. There are a few imported wines that distract everyone from the fact that the rest could be bought at the local liquor store. The food is saturated in butter, the robes and linens are straight out of a magazine that thousands of other properties use, and the amenities are mass-produced. What these prices really pay for is the absurd staffing required to wait on clients who are used to spending money on services and time savers. They don't just want to order room service, they want a tasting experience. Most people are content lounging by the pool. These guests need a masseuse, a manicurist, and a towel boy. Valets, spa attendants, recreation managers, social media teams, a staff so large it even requires a secondary kitchen crew just to run the staff cafeteria. The beds and towels are nice though. Story 41. I feel like, with the advancement of technology, the difference in a lot of things in the US between what the middle class and the top tier can get is much smaller than it used to be. people walk around with the literal internet on their phones. So much technology and underlying infrastructure make normal life really comfortable for the majority of people. Take cars, for example. Overall, they're really nice. Sure, a Nissan Sentra is way cheaper than a Lamborghini, but the difference today is much smaller than the difference between a Pinto and a Lamborghini in 1980. You're probably thinking speed, but aside from that, the other features are solid. CarPlay, safety, reliability. Outside of status, a Nissan Sentra offers about the same or even more utility than a Lamborghini. And by utility, I don't mean the ability to get laid. It's kind of like owning a nice 4-bedroom house versus a 16-bedroom house. How many of those rooms are you actually going to use? Or to draw another analogy, the difference between the worst player in the NBA and LeBron, Kevin Durant, or Jokic is actually pretty small, compared to the difference between the worst player in the NBA and you, unless you've played in the NBA. In the past, our starting point wasn't the worst NBA player. It was the starting point guard for a small Division III college that had just started their basketball program. I still think the biggest difference that money makes is in healthcare. Being able to get surgery or cancer treatment without worrying about it financially, that's the real money flex. Story 42. As a jeweler, I work with a lot of affluent clients, and you'd be surprised how often they ask me to make replicas of their own jewelry using lab diamonds. They travel a lot and don't want to risk losing their originals. Some even request replicas of pieces sold at Christie's or Sotheby's. A necklace that sells for $30 million at auction might cost around $500,000 to recreate with lab diamonds. Just an example. Same look, same prestige, but way less anxiety. Wealthy collectors are actually very cautious with their real jewelry. The expensive stuff stays in a vault, and they enjoy the replica stress-free. For them, it's about the look, not the risk. If a lab piece gets lost or stolen while traveling, it's an inconvenience, not a life-altering loss. Story 43. I worked at a luxury boutique hotel in a popular tourist destination for 3 years, and in my experience, those rich people were not happy to pay for anything. They complained about the cost of the room, valet parking, bottled water, the spa, room service, everything. They would take things and then throw a fit when we charged them. Some would even make up complaints to get things comped. For 3 years, it was people saying, "I paid X dollars for this hotel and I can't believe you're not going to provide me some random arbitrary thing they think they deserve." Honestly, I think it comes down to the difference between being truly wealthy and being nouveau riche or upper middle class. Most of our guests were the latter, and they were extremely possessive of their money. Story 44. Swiss watches. You're often paying more than 10 times the cost for a brand name. Former Cartier and Baume & Mercier repair tech here. In recent years, Swiss companies have hollowed out the links in gold watch bracelets, but still charge the same price for significantly less actual gold. Buying a no-name or lesser-known Swiss watch will be much cheaper than going for the big, well-known brands. Many people don't realize that mechanical watches need servicing every few years, and Swiss quartz watches are outperformed by Japanese watches for a fraction of the cost. Final thought. I wore a Citizen EcoDrive perpetual calendar the entire time I was repairing these watches, and it never once needed service or repair. That's a $300 watch. Story 45. I have a niece whose friend introduced her to some new friends she had fallen in with. Suddenly, my niece was talking about her new nightlife. This group loved going to clubs, pooling their money to get a VIP table, and taking turns ordering bottles. My niece is a single mom who raised her 24-year-old daughter on a meager income. These new friends and their Friday night bottle service junkets were draining her bank account. Eventually, she realized that the group was led by another woman they called Mama, who had cleverly recruited them. Mama encouraged them, as 30-somethings reclaiming their youth, to go to all these clubs and spend money like water. Turns out, this was her business model. She was paid by the clubs to bring in people to spend their hard-earned paychecks. It was only discovered because my niece's original friend, the one who introduced her to the crew, thought they were just an organic friend group. She started organizing home gatherings and potlucks until Mama stepped in and told her to stop screwing with her business. It's so sad that people will scam others like this. Story 46. I'm a bartender who worked at a luxury hotel for 5 years. I would help out in other areas for a few extra bucks when asked. I was in a large city, not a tourist or resort destination, though we did get some tourists. Our bread and butter was business travelers, and our offerings, amenities, etc., were massive ripoffs. It didn't matter what we charged, the business traveler wasn't paying for it, their company with deep pockets was covering it. When wealthy guests spent on extras, I couldn't understand why. Why spend your own money to be suckered? I asked my bosses why a company would pay for one of the most expensive hotels for an employee. The answer came down to retention. It's cheaper to spend to keep an employee happy than to recruit and train a new one. So, when you see that $15 minibar Snickers and wonder who would pay for it, it's there for the business traveler who's allowed anything and everything. Story 47. Not a luxury industry per se, but I have a friend who offers custom cabinetry services. Kitchens, cupboards, bathrooms, you name it, he'll make it. His clientele ranged from your average Joe, who would pay $10,000 for a kitchen fit-out, to someone willing to spend $500,000 to $1 million if they had to. Why? This had nothing to do with time or convenience like other examples. It was purely for bragging rights. The satisfaction of being able to spend that amount on a kitchen, use it, and show it off to friends. The difference? The outside of the kitchen had to look perfect, down to the last millimeter with no obvious signs of mistakes. You could make errors, but they couldn't be visible. He's told countless stories, painting over chips with white paint, covering bad sheets with cheap sheets from the local hardware store, ripping out bricks in a wall and installing a cabinet over it to hide it, hammering wood into place and taping over splits. The list goes on. The cabinetry itself wasn't necessarily better or worse. It was custom, and that was enough to justify charging whatever the client was willing to pay. Why did people want it? They wanted to say their stone benchtop was imported from Italy, their soft, close finishes were German, or their tap was handcrafted in some exotic village in Spain. The truth? Everything was cheap. Sometimes it was Temu cheap. If he couldn't get it from a local discount supplier, it came from Temu. And boy, did they brag about it to their friends who came over to watch the kitchen get assembled. Number 1 rule, unload and repackage offsite, or throw away the packaging on the customer's property so no trace was left. Offer it as a free service to make it feel special. I definitely agree that in certain industries like hospitality, you are paying for what you get. There are definitely businesses out there doing the right thing and offering genuinely high-quality products to their clients. I just thought it was interesting that my friend, an average Joe with slightly above average skills, not outstanding by any means, is making serious bank from this. Story 48. I used to work in the upscale home furnishings industry. I would say a lot of furniture is grossly overpriced in general, but especially for the upscale brands. When I worked there, in the finance department, the margins were 80 to 90% on most items. Our competitors, some of whom charged even more, were using the same materials and almost identical designs. It's funny when I see people mock furniture companies that aren't as chic, yet are far more reasonably priced while offering nearly the same quality and designs that fit what they actually need for their home. Story 49. Probably everything? Poor people have to do everything themselves. They can't afford to take their car to the mechanic, so they fix it themselves. They can't afford restaurants to eat at or private chefs to cook in home, so they cook their own food. Their dishwasher broke 5 years ago and it's not a priority to spend money to fix it, so they wash dishes themselves. Just about everything normal people do themselves, rich people have someone to do that for them. They have someone to pay their bills, do their taxes, mow their lawn, pick the kids up from school, take them to extracurriculars, clean their house, do their laundry, make their food, help the kids with their homework. The list goes on. Rich people have heated floors in their homes. Anyone that's not super rich will be all, why not just put on socks? I've heard stories of rich kids being cold in their apartments when they leave home for college. Their parents rent them a nice place near campus and they don't realize turning the heat on in the winter is a thing because the apartment doesn't have an automatic climate control thermostat. Something as simple as having the maid make your bed in the morning seems like an extravagant luxury that a poor person wouldn't even think about, since it takes 30 seconds. But a rich person can't fathom not having someone make their bed in the morning. When you're poor, the idea of paying some mechanic $150 hard to fix your car when you can do it yourself seems like a ripoff. Story 50. I worked in the airline industry and had flight benefits that allowed me to fly first class, business class, etc., if space was available. Yes, it's way better sitting up front than sitting in the back. But when you look at the fare prices of first or business class, especially on international flights, they're typically extremely high. Sometimes the prices are so steep that it's not really worth it unless someone else is paying, or you have a ton of money to burn. For example, I've seen Chicago to Tokyo round-trip tickets in first class go for $14,000 to $17,000. With a price like that, the food should be exceptional, and it's not guaranteed. Sure, it's better than coach food, but you're definitely not eating $17,000 good. That said, if you need to be well rested for an important meeting with millions of dollars at stake, maybe $14,000 to $17,000 is worth it. Story 51. I'm a musician, and I think high-end electric guitars are a bit of a ripoff. I specify electric guitars because acoustic guitars are a whole different ballgame. Generally, the further up the price chain you go, even into absurd $10,000 plus price tags, the better the quality and sound. But with electric guitars, you're essentially talking about a slab of wood with magnets. From a value perspective, the $700 to $1,200 range is the sweet spot. Above $1,200, the return you get rapidly decreases relative to the price. And this comes from someone who enjoys many high-end brands like American-made PRS guitars, but I also understand that the raw materials in those guitars are really no different from an imported Fender or Epiphone. I own a $3,000 guitar, a $2,000 guitar, several $800 to $1,000 guitars, a few $500 ones, and a handful of $200 guitars. The jump from $200 to $500 is very noticeable. The jump from $500 to $1,000 shows up in the finer details. Anything over about $1,500, in my opinion, becomes more about a status symbol. The materials used aren't worth the thousands of dollars in added cost as you go up to the $5,000 plus range, especially for Fender-style guitars, which are essentially the most basic guitars on the market. My favorite guitar is an $800 made-in-Japan Fender Telecaster. It is perfection. I was in Nashville a while back and stopped in at a high-end guitar store playing a bunch of $4,000 plus Fender Telecasters. I wouldn't trade my Japanese Fender for a single one of those handmade, custom shop USA guitars. To add to that, I wouldn't trade my made-in-Mexico Fender Telecaster, which cost $650, for most of those custom guitars I played. Sure, if I were rich, there are $10,000 PRS guitars I'd buy, but I appreciate those more as art pieces. Hyper-expensive guitars as purely a tool to make music? That's a ripoff. Story 52. I didn't work at a hotel or anything like that, but I worked at a high-end furniture warehouse. From the shipping department to inventory control, I saw how the whole operation ran. The quality of the items that celebrities, hotels, or whoever was buying was often finessed. They were buying cheap, terrible quality furniture from Vietnam. The markups on these items are crazy. Say they buy something from a manufacturer in Vietnam for $80 and sell it stateside for $500 to $1,000. That's wild to me, just for a brand name and terrible quality. I'm talking compressed wood and hollow items. Honestly, furniture from IKEA is better than a lot of what they were selling. It really showed me that rich people often care more about a brand name than the actual quality of an item. Story 53. I had a job that wasn't fancy at all, but it catered almost exclusively to the top 0.1 to 1%. Mole trapping. I didn't even know it was a job until I got it. Honestly, if society restarted, it would never exist again. It's entirely useless. Moles are actually good for your yard. They naturally aerate the soil, which is amazing for many reasons, and their presence often indicates a healthy ecosystem. But the mounds are unsightly and can pose a danger to large livestock, so the main customers are farmers and estates that will never be listed on a map. The service itself is insanely expensive, quickly running into the thousands for large properties. The worst part? Once those tunnels are there, you can't really get rid of them, and new moles eventually move in, perpetuating the cycle. With nearly zero overhead, the profit margins are incredible. Story 54. Not the super rich, but for folks who fancy themselves wealthy. Suits, or really even shopping at luxury stores. I needed a suit with a short turnaround for an event the next day. A jerk move, I know, but it was what it was. I went to Saks and dropped about $3,000 on an Armani because off the rack was the only way to get what I needed in time. It's a nice suit, but if I'd had a bespoke suit made, I could have spent half as much for an equivalent garment. I shrugged it off. essentially paying an a-hole tax for the convenience of an unrealistically short turnaround. But if I'd had the time, I would have absolutely gone to a proper tailor and had a suit made just for me, rather than a very nice-looking but mass-produced suit. Even then, when you really break it down, there's only so worthwhile that sort of expense for one outfit will ever be. I've seen people in well-tailored $100 suits from JCPenney show up at entire events with the wealthy, looking and acting classier than people who could buy and sell the entire town they lived in. The value is in the exclusivity of the tag inside, a tag no one ever sees. While I was picking out shoes to go with my suit, I saw a pair of Chuck Taylors on the shelf. Not the kind you get at Foot Locker, but still just a marginally fancy colorway and sole treatment for your average Chucks. Price tag? $275. You could probably find the same pair at Journeys for $50. The ultra-wealthy wouldn't be shopping at Saks. This was at Metro Detroit's Rich People's Mall. People who consider themselves rich but are below the pay grade of the C-suites of the auto industry or professional athletes shop there. Story 55. I worked at a highly rated spa resort for a while. Guests were told not to tip because an 18% gratuity was automatically added to just about everything. It was supposedly distributed among all employees and added to our paychecks, like a tip pooling situation. Some departments, however, were allowed to opt out of the tip pooling system and instead give all employees in that department a flat raise, equal to the average bump from tips. Housekeeping and outdoor adventure both chose the raise. I worked in outdoor adventure, and I remember the average bump from the gratuity was about $2.75 per hour. They gave us a $3 raise, removed us from the tip pool, and then tried telling us, "Look, you got a $3 raise." Some of us pointed out, "Actually, it's only a 25-cent raise, but nice try." It made job postings and offers seem much more generous than they actually were. You were also supposed to take any tips you received and turn them in to be added to the pool. The only people I knew who actually did this were employees working inside the building, where someone might see them pocket a tip. People gave me tips sometimes, and you bet I kept them, especially after being taken out of the tip pool. Story 56. I'm not rich, but I've been in the automotive industry for going on 16 years. I know a dozen or so wealthy guys, and 2 of them are stupid rich. From my industry perspective, the modern super and hypercar ecosystem is wild. Ferrari is ridiculous, and Porsche a little bit too, though I'd love a flat nose or an '89 911. To get some of these cars, you have to buy 10 Ferraris just to be allowed an allotment. Not even the car itself, just the chance to buy one, and you might get denied anyway because they gave it to an oil billionaire willing to pay 3 times the price to skip the line. To get a GT3 RS, you either need to know someone willing to sell theirs, have an inside contact at Porsche, work with a really good broker, or buy 1 or 2 other Porsches, like a GT3 Touring, Turbo S, Cayman, or Carrera S, just to be allowed to spec a GT3 RS. One of my friends went through 6 Porsches before being allowed to spec his GT3 RS. Stupid. Insane. Lamborghini, though? A brand new Revuelto, Tenerario, or Huracan SVJ is no problem. Pagani, I'm told, by 2 friends who own them, is a fantastic experience. No paywall issues like other brands. Standing in a showroom, talking about acquisitions worth millions of dollars in cars is wild to be a part of. It's especially ridiculous that I've been asked for my opinion on details of these purchases, as if I'd ever be able to afford one. Story 57. There was an office decoration contest between 2 CEOs. Guy number 1 had an impressively large saltwater fish mounted on his wall. Guy number 2 felt he had to top it. He chartered an expensive private flight to Africa for a chauffeured safari ride, during which he shot a fierce wildcat trapped in a fenced area and mounted the snarling head for thousands more. Why was it a ripoff? It was cheating. He paid for a faked experience to feign triumph in a risky encounter. Guy number 1 really did haul in that giant, fighting, twisting fish from the deep. It could have pulled him in or cracked the boat. Guy number 2 didn't wrestle his catch to the ground, risk attack, or chase it for miles through the treacherous desert. There was no physical strength or bravery involved. It was like shooting fish in a barrel or buying a counterfeit Louis Vuitton suitcase to fool observers. It wasn't a fraud or scam. He knew it wasn't a real hunt, so he got what he paid for. It just wasn't the best use of decorating funds. Story 58. I worked in room service at the King David Hotel. Probably not the most luxurious hotel in Israel, but the one that hosts foreign diplomats. During my time there, I served Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell, Hillary Clinton, Jean-Claude Van Damme, among many others. A few observations. Americans, for some reason, drink the most atrocious coffee ever. The stuff they call filter or drip. You'd have to pay me to drink that garbage, not the other way around. But since it was a luxury hotel, that coffee was expensive. In general, any food establishment makes far more money on drinks than on food. The way high-tier American diplomats were usually set up is that they had a suite with their security detail stationed in the room, facing the door and other rooms. Room service wasn't allowed entry unless the guests were out. So, to get their coffee, a staff member had to bring an electric stove with a kettle full of this atrocious liquid and leave it with the security detail, along with a few cups, sugar, and creamer, which I don't think anyone ever actually used. For the same price, they could have ordered proper espresso, cappuccino, or other more exotic coffee preparations from the bar, which was open 24/7. Story 59. I worked the air-conditioned suites at Jack Trice Stadium. A plate of 24 cookies and brownies cost them $250. A six-pack of Bud Light was $40. We had a suite in the South End, much cheaper than the center, whose occupants spent $16,000 every game on catering and ate less than half. Every suite started at $50,000 for the season. The President's Suite regularly racked up a $50,000 bill on booze alone. My mom worked the Hunkeser Suite, big-name real estate folks, and got a $6,000 tip at the end of the season. That was the vacation money that year. She was lucky. If you got stuck in the end zone, coaches and wives, the President's Suite, or up top serving the announcers, you'd never get a tip. Just $12 an hour for a 14-hour day, roughly 8 times a season. Story 60. I work in the high-end office furniture industry. It's insane how people will spend around $300,000 on furniture. I'm not talking about a complete building layout. This is for personal offices they barely even use. We usually hook them in with lines like, "This couch was designed in Milan while the designer soaked in the sun, and that inspired the shapes," and so on. The leather, of course, is from Italy. Blah, blah, blah. But honestly, the designer is Chinese and only stayed in Milan for a couple of weeks. The leather is the shoddiest Italian leather, which then gets shipped to China, where the furniture is built and then shipped to the office. Going into it, I really felt bad. It's how we were taught to do things. But the commissions are tolerable. Don't even get me started on the environmental aspects. We're trained to say that money from the furniture goes to protect random forests around the world, but in reality, a portion just goes to some random land plot. If enough clients buy in, the company ends up with fresh land to build another factory. Story 61. I was an executive at a high-end skincare company, and the entire product line was a ripoff. We were selling products containing 1 ounce of product, bottle, dispenser, packaging, even factoring in transportation and logistics that cost $2.34 to produce in total for over $120. And people didn't even think twice. The U.S. cosmetic and skincare industry is minimally regulated, and the owners of this company took full advantage. They often pushed to make bold, completely unsubstantiated claims on the packaging, then expected me to word those claims in a way that avoided classification as a structure function claim, letting them sidestep FDA scrutiny entirely. To be clear, this company never conducted any efficacy testing. Actually, they never conducted any scientific testing at all that could have validated their claims. Per the regulatory agencies, as long as we made incredibly vague statements like, may reduce inflammation, or has been known to restore skin elasticity, it didn't matter whether it was true. It's also important to note that despite their multi-million-dollar yearly revenue, they maintained a relatively small staff, never more than 12 people total, including the 2 owners, myself and the shipping team. Over the 8 years I was there, I saw 132 people come and go due to the super toxic work environment, horrendous pay, and misleading marketing campaigns. So I guess all that to say, I take every single skincare company with a grain of salt. Story 62, I worked for a luxury national home builder. You would be amazed at the upcharge people were willing to pay. Talking $100,000 or more, minimum. We use the same trades, vendors, and materials as Lenner or Dreamfinders, often right down the street in the same master-planned community. The only real difference was the architecture, which I suppose some people thought was worth the extra cost. Most paid the premium for the brand and to live in a luxury community. When you look at the cost per square foot compared to the next tier down, it was astronomical. Story 63, I work in investment banking. When a company first sells stock on an exchange, they often price it low to incentivize investors. One company I recently worked with sold $300 million of stock, and it immediately doubled in value. So they basically gave away $300 million to attract investors. My company also hosts massive, all-expense-paid conferences, covering all the food, beverages, and other costs for attendees who are there because their companies do business with us. We host dinners where we might spend $1,000 per person without any guaranteed advantage. But if even 1 in 10 attendees ends up doing business with us, it ends up being worth it. Story 64. As someone who's worked in high-end bars and hotels, getting bottle service when you can't absolutely afford it always baffles me. The upcharge from retail and industry prices is insane. A 50-pound bottle of Prosecco probably costs around 7 to 15 pounds wholesale, and buying a bottle of whiskey to your table in a restaurant or bar based on the per-shot markup comes out to about 150 pounds for a mid-range bottle you could probably get at Tesco for 45 pounds. Everywhere does this. It's unfortunately just part of the industry. But people who don't have money to burn, or a company card, and still do it always confuse me. You could have just as great a time with your friends buying the same bottle for much less. Story 65. I worked in a luxury sport for a few years and had several clients. High-end clothing and equipment is huge in that world. I know people who would happily pay over $150 for a single performance shirt that probably cost the manufacturer $50 or less. They could buy a similar item online for much less if they shopped around, but they wanted the brand name. Fine, it's their money. But that mentality still baffles me. What made it worse was the constant competition over who had the best clothing or equipment or the most color options. I've seen less affluent people spiral into debt trying to keep up with those wealthier than them. I know at least one person who ruined her credit trying to keep up with people earning 3 to 5 times her salary. Unless someone is mega loaded, it's simply not sustainable. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.